Thank you so much for that brilliant overview and for sharing the book. I had the privilege of reading it this week, and I have to say, I start by saying I really, really enjoyed it. It provides, I think, quite an encompassing theoretical lens and a language that we can use to understand how algorithms shape and are shaped by these dynamics, complex interactions, power relations, patterns of resistance, historical contexts. I think the book will be quite relevant and accessible to researchers who are looking at algorithmic societies from a lot of different vantage points, which describes, I think, the audience here and our research centres, which are made up of interdisciplinary folk who all look at automated decision-making and digital media. And I think what the book does really well is to induct us all into the theories of new institutionalism, the different traditions and concepts, and to draw out their kind of explanatory power by applying them to a lot of different contexts, as you touched on. So the book traverses such a broad range of cases, predictive policing, news media, dating apps, organ donation and allocation. I particularly enjoyed the chapter on the use of algorithms in public service and administration. We delve into some examples that we're very familiar with in Australia, robo-debt, and some examples from Brazil, which are very alarming, but provided a lot of insight. And I think what that chapter does really well is to ground sort of present dynamics in the historical context and the dynamics that shaped digital transformation across a lot of national contexts. So we talk about, the role of international organizations and events like the financial crisis, which meant that these digital transformation agendas played out against the backdrop of austerity measures, which then informed their values and their rules. I think we were probably both in Canberra around the time that the digital transformation agenda, or Gov 2.0, was taking hold there. And I think one of the contradictions, at least as far as that agenda was articulated in Australia, was that a couple of the guiding principles were that this would actually open up access to public information. And there was a lot of emphasis and excitement around the possibilities for these new collaborative tools, social media, wikis, to actually enhance public input and collective intelligence. But as the book points out, what we got in some cases, some aspects of public service and administration, was rather aspects being hidden from public scrutiny through the use of algorithmic systems, implementation of algorithmic systems, and the involvement of the private companies that built them, which I think brings us to that core theme that you touched on at the end, the democratization of algorithms, which is what I'm really excited to talk to you about, because that's one of my interests as well. I think the book makes the case really well that the democratization of algorithms as institutions is necessary if we are to preserve democracy, and also optimistically that it's achievable, that it's possible. You talk about how a lot of this discussion has focused on algorithms used for public services, where we have clear expectations of fairness, equality, and democratic accountability. But there's also obviously a lot of private or proprietary systems that have public and democratic implications, and so they need to be part of this project as well. And so I wanted to bring you to that topic, which you touched on already, which is we're sort of at a moment where a lot of private firms, I think we're calling them frontier AI firms at the moment, are embracing this idea of democratization, at least rhetorically. We're seeing experiments with citizen assemblies, as I think you mentioned, and deliberative procedures at Anthropic, Meta, OpenAI has an enormous project. I'm curious as to your thoughts on whether or not specifically these corporate initiatives to democratize will help or hinder the project of democratization, and your thoughts on some of the tensions between the dynamics of private ownership and democratic accountability.
Thank you. That was very kind and generous. Thank you for your comments and question. Yeah, I think I share this concern, and I think, and this is a very good question, because I think that this concern is not specific of artificial intelligence. So when I think about deliberative experiments, and I think about deliberative democracy broadly speaking, there has been at least 4 decades of research looking at how they may be central to the existence of democratic legitimacy, but how experiments draw from this language of deliberation in order to promote certain forms of decision, to promote certain forms of, to legitimize certain decisions that have been taken in other arenas, and that actually draw from public engagement in order to make legitimate certain forms of certain directions when we think about policy. And I think that AI is now in that same faces the same ambivalent. We should be concerned about the directions in which these experiments evolve. And in the same way that, for instance, when I think about deliberative innovations in all sorts of discussions, if you think about, so we're going to have a mining project. So we're going to have a deliberation, and this is going to be held, organized, funded by BHP. And this is just an example. We would be, oh, that's okay, let's see how it goes. But is there any form of external accountability, and how is it organized? And I think we should be aware of these. That has always been a central concern when we think about AI. So there is a discussion on what exactly means this idea that corporations are willing to have AI regulated. Is it a form to protect their business so as to avoid other companies and actors to develop AI? What are the implications of this? So how was participation actually enacted? How were participants recruited? What are the actual possibilities of building a discussion? What are the consequences over governments? And are these, and sorry, I'm just throwing questions that I would have for this. And are these democratic innovations, quote unquote, hindering the existence of other forms of democratic innovation? And I think that just to say, okay, we are having proper public discussion because OpenAI has this big project and to promote deliberation. I think we should be paying attention to it closely and to make sense of it, not just to embrace it and say, okay, this is the solution for the democratization of artificial intelligence. And yeah, so I think it is, as we said before, and it is kind of a critical juncture that can lead to very different directions. And we should be attentive and concerned about which way we are heading to when I think about this.
Well, that sort of brings me to my next question, which is, yes, we are sort of at a critical junction. We've got a lot of different actors within AI firms, but also legislators, not just in the EU, but in Brazil, here who are working on institutional design and making choices that will have legacy effects that may constrain future options. So is there anything that you're worried about looking at this, at what's happening at sort of the national levels in terms of setting us on an anti-democratic path?
Is there anything I'm worried? I think the question could be, is there anything that you're not worried? I think, yeah, because the topic is urgent. The discussions are happening really quickly. When they get to touch on more controversial issues, you have a lot of power and resources coming from big tech companies. So we have a bill now which is under discussion on artificial intelligence, but another one on which was called the fake news, but it's pretty much the regulation of platforms. That's how it evolved. And it had several topics and it was about to be voted, but then you had like a massive campaign from big tech companies saying that that was horrendous and that would lead to the inexistence of freedom of speech. And then even in Google, like you open Google and they said bad things about this bill, which had been built by social movements through very long discussions and debates, which is the bill 2630 last year. And then it was withdrawn. And then Google was actually convicted because the use of its power and strength in order to do a campaign against a specific bill and hindering the existence of public debate. So I'm very concerned with the urgency of the topic and the need to do it in complex terms, to be capable of doing it in ways that are actually democratic and that people can make sense and can actually engage in the construction of certain forms of regulation, but in which you have very strong actors with resources in order to establish the boundaries of where we're heading to. So I am concerned. I think that there are other forms of resources and energies that are trying to make a proper discussion and to nurture this discussion. But I'm very concerned with some of the developments as a democratic theorist.
I've got 1,000 more questions, but we're actually running out of time, so I think I should probably cede to the room. Are there any questions within the room? Yeah. So broadly, the question is whether or not the book deals with post-Foucauldian notions of governmentality.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really important area of studies, specifically Rouvroy's argument on algorithmic governmentality, drawing from Foucault and the implications in terms of surveillance and in terms of the datafication of life in order to make lives governable, which draws from Foucault's debate around governmentality. So we obviously mention this argument in this discussion, and I find it to be very useful and quite enlightening in terms of the comprehension of the phenomenon itself, although it's not the central point of our argument and topic. And I think it helps to make sense, and it helps specifically to make sense about the implications in terms of surveillance and in terms of the use of data to govern life, which is Foucault's basic argument back then. So yeah, I think it brings a very important layer of the debate in itself, and we briefly draw on that to in a complementary way. That's a a good way to pay attention to one of the layers of the phenomenon. Yeah.
I'll just say for the online audience, the question was broadly about lobbying dynamics, which you touched on specifically with the dynamics with defense in the US and the intelligence community and dominant digital platforms.
Okay. So thank you, Bernadette, for your question. Yeah, so I also share your concern. So we touched the topic, I would put it like that, on the chapter on security assemblages. Because if we're going to, and specifically in the first dimension, if we talk about the design of institutions, the role played by defense corporations is central. And so this is one of the topics. And in the chapter on the platformization of governance, there's a related topic on that, because we also have a concern on what Helen Margetts called shadow bureaucracies, which is these companies that that are providers of very specific areas of expertise, and then you have states totally dependent on that bureaucracy, which is not subjected to accountability. And so these 2 points. But I think that the elements you're raising, it's the kind of thing we would expect to see when applying the analytical framework to specific cases. And to think about the implications of these, of people working in government and in corporations, and implications in terms of the design of these institutions, also known as algorithms, that are setting the context of several other forms of interaction. So I think, yeah, your point is brilliant in terms of the type of concern we should pay attention to. And if I may, I don't know if we have, but I just wanted to bring 2 other points that connect to other questions. One is the secrecy of these relationships. And one of the points of that we discuss when talking about democratization of algorithms is that, okay, secrets are part of politics. It's not that everything should be visible at all times, but there should be a discussion, as several deliberative Democrats have discussed, like Dennis Thompson or Simone Chambas, that there should be a discussion on what can be secret and what should be public. And I think that the point here is that several of the things that are kept secret in several of these relationships are unjustifiable publicly. And this brings me to Tegan's question again. And this may be odd, but I'm an odd type of deliberative Democrat, because I'm not a big fan of mini publics. I like public discussion. I like public debate. I like critical social movements and forms of resistance, and that actually engender broader forms of discussion than very specific design mini publics in specific settings conducted by a specific set of people. So I'm not a deliberative Democrat. And I think that these that we're bringing are the topics that should be discussed publicly. So what can remain secretly? What are the types of information that the regulation of these platforms of artificial intelligence should require to be made open? It's not only the codes in itself, but where are these people working, and what are the so what's the movement between corporations and state that are actually affecting our lives? So I think that that's part of the broader picture in terms of public discussion and publicity and secrecy when you think about democratic values.
So we've got a couple of questions from the online audience. One says that, and I'll just read it verbatim. This is from Nardine. Much of the political science theory sociology research argues that there is something unique and unprecedented about AI and algorithms, 2 ways of understanding and doing democracy. What do you think of this? There's just one final question, which I'll add to the mix. This is from Brooke Ann. How does commons theory fit into your framework? In what ways does it fail to account for the complexities in democratizing algorithms?
I don't think I have a final response to any of these questions, or final would be too strong, but a proper response, I would say. But in terms of the first question, and I apologize, I didn't catch the name of the person who asked the question, but in terms of how unprecedented it is. I think there is actually, so trying to define here, I think that then the lack of clarity in terms of the possible futures, the opening up of horizons of future we cannot fully anticipate, have a little bit of unprecedency, if that's a word in English, Although I don't like to think in terms of, oh, everything is new, everything is completely different. I think we are facing problems that we have faced about power, about democracy, about inequalities, about racism. We are facing certain problems that have been around for centuries when we are discussing these topics. So I wouldn't advocate the argument that everything is completely new and everything is completely different. But I also don't want to say, oh, this is politics as usual, and this is all good and old institutions that we should democratize, because it changed drastically the way we think in terms of agency. And it's happening in a context in which we have several dimensions of democratic erosion. And I think that this is one component of a broader picture in which things are changing radically and drastically in several ways. So there is something unprecedented in that way as well. So yeah, we should learn from politics as usual, but reconceive of concepts, ways of dealing with things in order to make sense of a radically and rapidly changing world. Regarding algorithmic literacy, and I'll be really quick in 30 seconds. Yeah, I think that's part of the topic, obviously, and a relevant part. But I'm concerned with solutions that think that algorithmic literacy are a panacea or the solution for everything. I'm particularly concerned with responses that think of literacy as a way to deal with disinformation, as if people knew how to deal with social media, for instance, or if they knew what disinformation, the problem would be solved. And I don't think that this captures the broader picture of how the phenomenon is constructed and is grounded. So I find literacy as part of the solution with many other solutions, legal, technical, professional journalism, but not in itself the solution for the problem. So that would be my quick response. And regarding commons, yeah, this is a big one, and we obviously deal with Ostrom's discussion on institutional theory, and this is relevant to think about if we can make sense of algorithms as full of commons and this sort of argument. But yeah, so this is a broad topic we are also working on and interested in. And we find it relevant in order to discuss the democratization of algorithms and how to deal with them. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.